All right. Welcome to today's webinar, The Great Unraveling, How the Pursuit of Progress Ignited Global Turmoil. And it'll be featuring a chat with Jeff Uhlich. Our exploration of global chaos over the month of November and the forces and sources of change that seem to be driving it have been the intent to learn not just what's driving change, but to anticipate and mitigate the risk. It's apparent that society is failing. At least that's the view of some. I'm not quite sure that I go along with it or that all of us do, but there's obviously something going on, and we've been calling it chaos, and where it's taking us, we're not quite so sure. The chaos on a global scale appears to be the result. A day doesn't go by where CNN or one of the national broadcasters doesn't have another source of chaos or concern, whether it be the weather, a shooting, or a revolution. And while it may take some time and the price paid may be enormous, there is hope. People in society usually adapt. Well, in our newsletter this week, Klaus Rodenberg explored innovation itself as both the source and the solution for resolving chaos. And then Jeff, our presenter today, discussed the features of the attention economy and the shocking amount of time people now spend on virtual platforms. So I've asked Jeff if he'll join us today as a contributor to this topic, and I'm going to back off just now, and I'll let Jeff take over. So welcome, Jeff. Give them a little bit of your background, even though most people on our webinars know who you are.
Yeah, sure, Perry. Well, in terms of my background, I guess, mostly retired ex-HR person for 35, 40 years. Worked mostly here in Canada, but also 6.5 years overseas in the Middle East in the higher education sector. And I'm a student of technology. And I mean, where you and I crossed paths, I don't know if everybody's familiar, but we worked together at KPMG when you were the managing partner in the management consulting practice, and I was in the HR practice. And that's where we worked together for 4 years. And somehow since then, we've managed to stay in touch and stay in contact. And I've been part of the KEI Network for years now, and still enjoy the interaction and the information sharing. So that's what brings me to today.
Well, so your joy I share. Thank you.
Yeah. So can everybody see my opening screen there?
Yes, looks fine.
Okay, good. So as Perry mentioned, this is intended to be a kind of a fast recap of the November 2024 series. It actually started in late October. And I called it in my article the elephant in the room. Perry, for this presentation, titled it The Great Unraveling, and refers to the pursuit of progress igniting global turmoil. And Perry started us off back in late October by identifying in a simulated interview that he had this matter of the paradox of progress and discontent. And I think Perry alluded to it in his opening comments. And we talked at that time about all of the significant advancements that have been made, technology, healthcare, living standards, and contrasting that with the rising discontent, which is happening simultaneously. So in spite of some of the amazing progress that's been made on so many different fronts, we have increasing social unrest and economic inequality, which we'll get to more about in a moment. The elements of environmental degradation, which we'll talk about in a moment as well, and then further in terms of Peter McKinnon's presentation. And then Perry also talked a lot about the human costs, which we'll expand on in a moment. So that's how Perry set the table for us in describing the the paradox of progress and discontent. And then he went on in a subsequent presentation and shared some really interesting information about wealth inequality. And I'm going to apologize in advance here, Perry, to you and Mel and Robert and Peter. I'm doing the highest of high-level sort of synopses of your presentations to kind of get the overall narrative arc in place. But I'm probably not going to do justice, so I'll invite you and Mel and And I don't think Peter's here today, or Robert, but if they were, I'd invite them as well to interject and supplement or add to any of the information that I'm sharing. But Perry talked about wealth inequality in terms of philanthropy and how that is targeted by rich individuals and not necessarily directed to where it does need to go, and how taxes are not sufficient to keep pace with the galloping progressive social programs that we have in so many cases, and that tax loopholes and tax allocation are issues that exacerbate and don't necessarily help the problem. And then we spent a lot of time talking about the rising increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I just included these two infographics quickly. This one is from the 2022 year. At that time, 10% of the people on Earth owned 76% of the wealth. I think it's higher now. And only 2% of the wealth was in the hand of the poorest 50% of the population. And on the chart on the right, I don't know if you can read that text, but the richest 1%, that number is so far above that of the other categories being shown there that it doesn't even fit onto the graph. And then today, just as a matter of coincidence on this topic, I got this bit of information that Elon Musk's level of wealth since the election has now expanded to over $400 billion. And the countries in red that are highlighted there are the only ones that have more wealth than Elon Musk. So there's only 55 countries in the world now that have more money than Elon Musk. And if he isn't the poster boy for wealth inequality, then I don't know who would rise to the list. So Perry then went on to talk about navigating progress and peril. And Perry, I'm taking some liberties with your material here. You talked about all of these interconnected features of contributing to economic instability. I put it into a kind of a cyclical graphic, because you then highlighted the connection of those things to the human cost, the homelessness, the conflict, the opioid crisis, mental health effects. And then we talked about how that's being aggravated by the effects of climate change and displacement of populations. And then that's exacerbated by the crisis of governance, which then contributes again to further interconnected economic instability. And around we go. Now, just 2 days after the American election, Robert McGarvey joined us. I think it was November the 7th or 8th. And he talked about that theme of discontentment. And from Robert's perspective, what he added to the conversation was the discussion of how progressive ideologies, the woke ideology in particular, has contributed to political instability and some of the division that we saw, and that we saw reflected in the results of the American election. He talked about the historical roots of critical theory and about Locke and Rousseau, and gave us a real interesting historical perspective on how we got to where we are. And I think what he highlighted as well was that there's a significant aspect of some of these ideologies as they're being expressed or promoted that are contributing to alienation of a significant segment of the society. And in fact, I think one of the examples that was discussed was the student loan forgiveness, which is seen in progressive circles as a really good thing that Biden was really promoting, but in other quarters, in other parts of the country, was seen as, well, how come they get that and we get nothing? And we're sitting here and suffering from the economic effects of globalization, and no one is paying attention to us. So it created some backlash. And Robert went so far as to contribute a part of the rise of figures like Donald Trump to this discontent. So it's certainly, I think you can make an argument for it fueling some of that polarization and hindering some of the constructive dialogue that everybody agrees was probably more necessary. Then we had a presentation a week later by Mel Head, and Mel talked about the role of technology in contributing to the paradox of progress and discontent, and really identified technology as a double-edged sword that needs a lot of thought and consideration and ethical deployment. And Mel identified some of the communications challenges and education challenges. and really emphasized the need for considering unintended consequences and trying in advance to mitigate those unintended consequences and build trust rather than further some of the division that we seem to be experiencing. And that led to Peter McKinnon's presentation, which was the wrap-up of the November series. And Peter introduced us all to the concept of polycrises, which are overlapping, interconnected, and simultaneous, and very, very broad in their effect. And he was really spending a lot of time on the environmentally driven degradation, the elements of planetary, what was the term? There were certain planetary measures that are at or nearing a level of collapse, and that we have exceeded already in 6 of the 9, I believe it is, the carrying capacity of the planet. And that this is all compounded by a governance crisis, that our very mechanisms of governance are less able to contend with the absolutely critical and necessary things that we need to do as a species to ensure our survival. And he ended with a warning, a rather stark warning, about the priority for some rather crucial, immediate, and globally coordinated action that was required. That was the one that I thought was the most sort of bracing and broadly systemic red flag for me out of all of the presentations, because this one seemed more existential than just simply problematic. I shouldn't say simply, because everything else that we talked about also has its own degree of difficulty, but this one was the big one for me. And so throughout all of those presentations, what I took note of were some recurring themes as well. Everybody seemed to be calling for balance in how we address all of these really complex challenges. And we talked about ideologically driven solutions and how those ought to be avoided, and we ought to be dealing with evidence and fact, set politics aside. Everybody was emphasizing the ethics as really critical to how we approach dealing with all of these challenges. And that's in terms of what Mel was talking about, in terms of responsible use of technology, equitable access to benefits, and mitigating risk. And we all, for a bunch of capitalists, I was surprised during the presentations over the course of the month with how many times there was a discussion about reevaluating some of the very values that are underpinning a capitalist society. We were talking about more sustainable practices and about less consumerism, and some of those are really at odds with what has gotten us to the point that we're at, which is a really interesting nut to crack, I think. And then another recurring theme was the role of AI and whether this was going to ride in over the horizon and save us, or whether it's actually going to make worse a lot of the challenges and problems that we talked about. So that's just at a very sort of meta level, something that pervaded throughout all of the presentations that we had in November. So all of those presentations, when I stood back and reflected on them, I thought, gosh, all of these brilliant people making all of these really informed and wise observations and providing us with this really thorough analysis, everything was sensible and rational and persuasive and really highlighted some really what I would describe as intractable challenges, really stubborn problems. And yet, even though they seem sensible and rational and persuasive, we seem stuck. And that got me to thinking, well, what is holding us back? What's the difference that makes the difference? And that, as you remember, I think, Randall, you referred to my opening slide as the elephant as a room, and that was the title of my article from a few weeks back. And I described the perspectives that Perry and Robert and Mel and Peter brought as, and now mine, as the old parable of the 6 wise men and the elephant. And everybody was describing a different beast, the same beast, but in different ways. And I think they're all correct, and it's all important stuff. But this is what all of this and reflection on all of this is what took me to arriving at my elephant. And for me, what sort of stood out in looking at it at a meta level was that there were 5 things that we didn't talk enough about. And that for all of those issues, they all exist within a context of a 4-year election cycle, which is a fact of most liberal democracies and most Western nations. We have a currently fractured, and I would call it atomized, pulverized media landscape. The mainstream media has never been less popular and less viewership. But we have a blogosphere, and we have, Substack, and everybody is publishing, and there are just many, many more sources of information. We have a population that is on one hand either polarized and vehement, in other words, really exercised on the left or the right, or we have in the vast middle a apathetic population who doesn't care, isn't involved, is disengaged. And then in the States, mostly, we have a political class that has been captured by lobbyists and big money. And that is primarily a US issue. But we talked during the sessions about the dominance of the US economy and culture on everything else that happens in the world. And like I said in my article, when the US gets the sniffles, Canada catches cold. And you can see that happening already as Trump starts to rattle his saber about tariffs for Mexico and for Canada and for immigration. And we haven't yet seen how that's all going to play out. And then there's the emergence of this attention economy, which was the focus of my article last week. And we'll talk a bit more about that. I'll touch on a few points from that. And then in that, also in that environment, in this context, is social media. We've got so many of these platforms that weaponize all of these extremes in what I've just outlined, and then pour gasoline on every seemingly small fire and can turn it into something much, much bigger. So those were things that when I stepped back and took away from all of the presentations that I think we didn't talk enough about. And that obviously, I'll get to that in a moment. Another theme that came about from all of the conversations that we had was the erosion of trust. And I just referred to, the media and how much less it's trusted, but institutions, experts of all kinds, information itself, and even society itself are less trusted. And as one example of this, I saw a Pew Research study just a week or two ago that nearly 25% of the US population doesn't trust that scientists have public's best interest at heart. And this gets back to what I already mentioned in terms of political polarization and the information overload and misinformation, and something that we talked about, I believe, in a couple of presentations over the month of November, which is the failures in global governance, and the UN was cited in particular. And so what this all pointed to for me is the need to reclaim common sense, which doesn't seem all that common at the moment, that not only ethical leadership, but effective leadership is a challenge. And then something around promoting informed and engaged citizenry. And I think the informed part is as important as them being engaged. And I refer to that middle group of the population that doesn't care and isn't involved. And those are, I think, 3 of the big challenges that arise from all of these presentations. So what do we do about this? That was a question that I was left with as well, because I'd referred to them as the sort of intractable challenge arising from all of these presentations. And I think for us as members of the KEI Network, one of our core problems is that we pay attention to what's going on. And when you pay attention to what's going on, then you're more aware of things that need, further attention and further work. And what I came up with for us in particular, what can we do at an individual level? Well, something that we do already, and that is that we encourage a civil dialogue. And we talk about topics every week here at the webinars that are sometimes we disagree about, but we always have a civil discussion and we have respectful conversations. And I think that's something important that we can do. We also, I hope, and I think we do mostly practice evidence-based decision making. and we act with integrity and common sense. And I think that continues to be important. And I think we could do more to mentor future generations. I'm sure we do that within our own social circles, but I don't think we do enough with expanding the reach of the KEI network and the webinars to include more people from younger generations, and also more women. Frankly, that's another group that is typically, absent, more so than men in these webinars. And that role, all of us as members of this network, we have something that is, we have experience, we have wisdom, we have information and knowledge to share, and we can do that. And the other recurring theme from all of the presentations over the course of the month of November was that leadership is important. And that's not just from our political leaders, but on an individual level. So those were some more tangible things that we can do at an individual level, even though we might be frustrated at what happens at a collective level from time to time. And then that article hit the ground, and it was followed by a message from Charlie Meredith to Perry and a few others in the KEI network. And Charlie shared this graphic from which represents 1 minute of the day of every day, and how much time people are spending in their various apps, whether it's Google and searches or TikTok, and how many videos are watched. 167 million videos being watched in 1 minute of every day. And Mel shared something with me. I didn't include it here, but Mel, maybe you can send that out. It's a visual representation of what that usage looks like if you were to expand it out into a 24-hour period, and how to wrap your head around how much time this represents. And Mel, correct me if I'm wrong, it was, if you were to shrink each minute of each of these down to the size of a sugar cube over the course of a 24-hour period, you would end up with a block of sugar cubes, 23 kilometers square. It's just I can't even begin to wrap my head around the amount of time that humanity is spending on these various platforms. The reason that I bring this up here is because I highlighted, sorry, Mel, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say it's not actually a sugar cube. It's just 1 grain of sugar. So
Okay, so that makes it worse, Mel.
it's worse,
A
definitely.
lot worse.
Right, okay, sorry. Imagine that, a grain of sugar, and then expand that to 23 kilometers square. That's the quantity of time, a physical representation of that humanity is spending on all of these platforms. And this isn't even all of them. So just bear that in mind. So Charlie shared that, and it just captured what I was referring to in the previous couple of slides as one of those intractable challenges of that the November series identified, and that is the attention economy. And I'm just going to spend 2 more slides on this. And it was just to sort of recap what I described in that article, that this is a relatively recent phenomenon, but it's actually been something that's been predicted since the 70s. I think 1971, Herbert Simon coined the term, and he made a very simple and prescient observation, and that is that when he knew that information was going to be abundant and more accessible, and that when information is abundant, attention becomes a scarcity and becomes something valuable. And that is accelerated or amplified by algorithmic content delivery systems and attention-based economic business models. And that's what gives rise to the attention economy. So human attention is now commoditized. It's being treated as a valuable commodity, and companies are vying for our eyeballs to capture them and to hold them on their platforms to increase their profits. And now that's why you see companies like TikTok and Google and Facebook and some of the others that we just looked at, Snapchat, why you see these companies having trillion-dollar valuations, because those captured eyeballs are useful to, you can slip an ad in every now and again, and that is driving traffic to those sites that sell stuff. And that's been a big engine of the economy. And it's not just the social media, it's places like Amazon and Temu and Shein and Amazon's Haul. I mean, these are all companies and platforms that profit from selling of goods through the attention that's being harvested from these companies. So in terms of impact, again, this goes back to what I was referring to in the earlier article. This has tremendous implications for individuals and for society cognitively. And Perry and I have had some conversations since about, the challenges that this presents for young people in terms of fragmented attention, in terms of ability to think critically and to think deeply about anything when you're constantly distracted and interrupted. Has social implications through that increasing polarization that we talked about. And it has political implications because you have politicians that are whipsawed from issue to issue based on what's gathering the attention of the day. And as I referred in my article, these platforms, social media platforms in particular, are being weaponized by foreign interests, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea even, and they are being used to mount information operations. And there are bot armies. Twitter is one of the worst offenders, and Elon Musk said he was going to address it. I don't think he has addressed it. There are still armies of bots that are being actively deployed to promote certain perspectives. And TikTok is an arm of the Chinese government, and it's been researched. There is information that is suppressed on TikTok that is against the interest of the CCP, and there is information on TikTok that is being promoted because it supports something that the CCP wants to encourage. That's just a fact of how these platforms are being used. So anyways, what it calls for is a lot more of what was referred to in one of the sources that I used, and that is attention literacy. It's not just computer literacy, it's attention literacy. Are we intentional and cognizant and conscious about what we're paying attention to and being selective and purposeful in that? Are we doing enough to ensure that these tools are being ethically designed and that they're being regulated? Are there other ways to establish business models that don't just profit from engagement? Maybe we have to do more to explore those. And I mean, I abandoned Twitter X a long time ago because of what I saw happening there. And I'm now on Blue Sky, and I've been on Threads, and I like Blue Sky. And it seems like they have some good content moderation policies. And they also do a lot to allow external links to be shared. They're much more news friendly. And so there are some options that you can look at that are better sources than some platforms that are not managing this environment as well. And then legal frameworks, need to be adapted to the needs of the attention economy. And Section 230 is a legislation in the States, which is the home of most of these platforms. And it's basically protected them from legal liability for anything on their sites that users publish. And that's a good thing it was a good thing in terms of getting those platforms up off the ground and getting them to be as strong as they are. But it also has a lot of negative consequences, and it creates an environment where a lot of stuff can be published, and their content moderation frameworks in a lot of these places are just not up to the task. So that's a few things that I came up with in terms of actually explaining the attention economy and a few things that we could think about doing about it. And that kind of wraps up the wrap up of the November series, and then the follow up on the attention economy that I wanted to share. And I don't know if I did go over my 15 minutes. Sorry, Perry.
No, look, that was extremely valuable, both in terms of the summary of what has preceded your presentation, as well as the deeper analysis you've done. It leads me to, I mean, I've got several questions here, and I'm sure others do too, but let me lead with this one. You made reference to what we have been doing as the KEI Network. And we do this among ourselves, and obviously, just the fact that people who have been participating continue to show up feel they're getting something. And I'm often told that there are few places they feel they can go to where they can have an honest and deep and insightful discussion without judgment. But in the attention economy, if we the KEI network, wanted to do something more impactful and broader, we need to get attention. But it's a game you're playing. So one can get attention in a whole variety of ways, and some of them are quite shocking, rude, misinformation, lying, threatening nuclear war. How do you function in a civil society in the interest of getting attention without conveying misinformation or without doing something that is panic driven? It seems to be a quandary. Those that have civil and societal interests to be calm, to have a balanced conversation, are not going to go out there and do what the attention, you're in competition.
Yeah.
So as a person wanting to be ethical as an individual and participate in the public, the public needs to get attention, and that means playing the game, because you're in a competition for attention with people that are using all sorts of nefarious, illegal, misinformed. So we stay where we are because we feel comfortable in being civil and ethical and insightful and doing what we as a group believe in, and almost consciously stay out of doing all of what it would take to become public to get attention. No, I'm giving you that as a profile because not just you guys, but others say to me, gee, the KEI network's a really good thing. You guys ought to get out in the public and do more, spend more money, do more. What could we possibly do that isn't going to put you in the mainstream of this nonsense of how to get attention?
Yeah. Well, I think you're identifying another paradox arising from all of the conversations that we've had, Perry, right? It's that
Absolutely.
as I said in one of my notes recently, I said, we all live in the attention economy now. And so, given that scarcity of attention under the umbrella of so much content that we are bombarded with every day, how do you rise above that noise? And you're right, other content providers, they resort to misleading, sensationalistic propaganda, all kinds of things to rise above that level of noise.
But let me interrupt though. This is not just corporations. We as individuals want attention. Maybe not us. Obviously, I do. I do the network and the webinar. I mean, 20,000. I'll put that number out there. But Mary Jane from Kenora puts out on Facebook stuff to get attention. She
Yeah.
wants to look pretty, or she's cutting her wrists. It isn't just the corporations that once owned the media. It's the billions of people on Earth that have access to the internet and these tools that are all in the game. It isn't just the media flooding us. It's every human being on Earth now having the capacity to try and tell a story and get attention, which just exacerbates and heightens the ludicrousy of what's out there as people try to get attention personally or corporately.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something I saw Jeff Kramer in the chat raised, and I wanted Jeff to speak to that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I often hear stuff on the radio or wherever I might be perusing about this think tank has come up with some sort of report, and and another think tank is doing it. This group here has enough brains between us that I think that we could qualify as a think tank, and start issuing our own press releases about things that we discover or come across through our discussions here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we are a think tank. I mean, we take topics, we explore them, we take opposite, contrarian positions. Randall, for sure, just to make certain that we're exploring all elements of the elephant, and it catches people. People do not understand what we do because they say, "Well, you're not doing it for money." And you're not doing it for subscriberships. You're not doing it for power. Why would you, given human drives and an understanding, why would human beings engage in what we do? Is curiosity a drive in itself? Is exploring a drive in itself? Or is this social? Are you guys simply lonely and this becomes a place to have a social connection.
I think it is. I think it is a drive in itself, but I don't think it's evenly distributed. I think there's something that members that are regular attendees here at these webinars have that curiosity and have that desire to contribute and share, and also hear from others. But if you look at that pattern in that chart that Charlie shared, so many of our population are passive consumers of information. They are not critical consumers. They're not deciding what to see. They are accepting what is served up to them by some algorithm that has been designed by legions of engineers to capture their attention and to hold it. And they are subject to that. They are not in control of that exchange, right? They are spending their attention, but they're just basically throwing money away. They're the money of their attention. And what we're doing is we're much more actively engaged in a conversation, and that's fundamentally different.
In marketing firms, I surely made this point prior to the webinar, that marketing firms are spending a lot of money on data. That data is about what is driving your attention. They look at your clicks. They understand you better than you understand yourself in terms of what drives you, what catches your attention. And then with the power of data and the power of using this data in order to manipulate your buying pattern, et cetera. So in light of the power that is being used to manipulate you to buy, and let's just zero in on the consumer side of it.
Yeah.
I find when I'm watching television or I'm listening to YouTube and these ads come on, I will either shut them off, or I'm saying to myself, the last thing I'm going to do is buy that product. Now, I am exercising critical thinking, a conscious behavior. My instincts aren't kicking in, or my appetite. I am consciously listening to that ad and making a decision. I am not going to do that. But it sounds to me, from what you've said, and I think you're right, marketing does seem to work.
Well,
I mean,
if you
look at the amount of money being spent for an advertisement during halftime in a Super Bowl people are spending billions to get Coca-Cola simply in front of someone as if they haven't done it before.
Right. Well, and Perry, if you look at those market caps of those big media conglomerates, those big firms,
Right.
and if you look at there's a key metric that is published in their annual reports and in their 10Ks, and it's called ARPU. It's average revenue per user.
Right.
And if you look at Facebook's average revenue per user, it is one of the most successful advertising platforms of all time. And what's different about TV advertising, you're talking about, and we are all, most of us are members of a generation that still watches network news, right? Whether it's CNN or MSNBC or whatever, Fox News or whatever. And those ads, we feel quite comfortable to tune them out, turn them off. But the atomized nature of the media landscape now is that we're talking about, and I referenced it in one of the emails, I think, we're talking about TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and these are snippets that are attention grabbing, that basically before you even look up if you're disinterested, which tells the algorithm that that's not something to feed you again, they can slip something in between those things while you're engaged or delighted or enraged, and that is a metric. TikTok is also one of the most profitable platforms, and it's because they've hijacked, along with Facebook and these other tools, they've hijacked something very fundamental to human psychology. And it's way, way more effective than old advertising in the sense of how it was done for decades on broadcast TV. That has been completely exploded in this day and age.
So we fear that human beings, you use the word passive, or a society which is not awake. And yet we have the capacity through education, we have the capacity through law to do certain things at a societal level that might address why, at a personal level, how to stop this. But we rail against individual control. We rail against social credit systems. We rail against government having more law and more power to regulate human behavior. We call it social engineering. I know in Australia and in many of the school systems, they are taking this cell phone away.
Yeah.
Some parents don't like that. Some right-wing extremists think that that's erosion of freedom of speech. And yet on the other side, we're afraid for these young kids, and we're afraid for the population at large that says you are being manipulated. And we're here to help you not be manipulated and restore your freedom. We've got a paradox there.
Yep. And I would project that in the US, where parents give their kids cell phones to take to school with them because their nightmare is a school shooting and they want to be able to communicate with their kids, there's no way on earth that they're going to let the school or anybody else take that cell phone that they gave to their child so that they could communicate with them in a crisis. There's no way they're going to give that up. And
Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, and I'm going to be doing a webinar or a smartphone workshop at this conference in the spring. Talks about how we have coddled a whole generation, raised children because parents are so afraid of them being kidnapped or them being harmed or them walking across the street that we have raised a generation of kids that are not resilient because they haven't been exposed to anything that would lead them to say, I need to adapt and I take responsibility. I can walk across the street without looking because there's lights everywhere. Look at the amount of signs on the highway now, implying that you can't make a conscious decision. We need to put speed limits everywhere. Mel, where's Mel? Mel and I talked about this week. We need to put speed limits everywhere. Human beings are not responsible. And put a sign up. At least city council can say, well, we put the sign up. I don't know. I think we've got to get back to educating people and expecting more of the individual to say, I will be responsible for myself. I will make decisions.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a couple of themes that have come up here, a couple of comments that Jeff Kramer made as well, and the other Jeff. Thoughts, you know, there's many situations we've been in where we have thought something for some time, but we don't know whether it's something that everyone else has thought of at one point or another until we start talking and exchanging ideas like we're doing here. And we find out that we're not necessarily alone. There are people who have thought about the same thing and may have different perspectives on it, and we can learn by discourse between us. I think the other thing we're doing is as we learn more, we're becoming a little bit more, we use filtering a lot more. If I go back 5, 6, 7 years or whatever, I used a computer for a long time, but looking at stuff that's on the system. Years ago, I'd see something and I'd read it and study it. And then as things changed a little bit, I started doing a quick read of it and maybe dismissing a few things. And then I got to a point where I was really skimming things, just kind of maybe every paragraph, just get an idea of what it's about. And then I would look at titles. Well, I've always looked at the titles, but if I saw the title, I could maybe just think about, well, this is what the subject is. Just make a decision that it's something that is not going to help further that need. And then I got down to a point where I basically just see the thing and delete it. And the final step is just not follow it at all. Right. So, you know,
you've just captured in a nutshell that dynamic of the attention economy and how in an abundance of information, your attention is the scarce resource. And that's how you've structured your life around this bombardment that you're getting. And I thought that was just perfect.
I've come down through the big part of the funnel right down to the small part, and I put a plug in the bottom.
So let me take this to another level, because we haven't talked about this dimension. When you are flooded with information, there is one thing you can do, and you use the word filter. And one of the filters you can use is to ask whether I trust the source.
Yep.
And as Jeff pointed out, trust has eroded, particularly at the top, and it's eroded because that's where the trust was. And so, you know, the books on the future of the professions, the rise of populism. There's something going on that is saying in the knowledge economy where the trust was at the top, and we would pay attention to those that had the certificate because we believe they were in the know. We doubt that they are in the know now. An interesting phenomenon. As you know, I often put conferences together. And I am reluctant to put the expert on the stage anymore. The person I want to put on the stage is a facilitator. And I like to get that facilitator using knowledge in the audience to orchestrate a discussion. I found some years ago when I did a series in St. Albert on growing up in St. Albert, growing old in St. Albert, growing a business in St. Albert. The one that I did on growing up in St. Albert was about kids. And everybody expected me to put teachers and the pediatricians on the stage. They wouldn't have learned a thing. The audience wouldn't have probably even paid attention. But who did I put on the stage? But the kids. And I had a facilitator probing the kids about what it was like to grow up in St. Albert. It was shocking. The parents had no idea what was going on in the community when they were outside of the house.
Yeah.
And I've done that frequently. I'm doing another workshop in the spring on the smartphone. I mean, Ronald Reagan said, you know, take down your wall. Maybe somebody someday will say, put down your phone. But the discussion is about that. And I've asked someone to facilitate, and the facilitator who's an academic said, I can't do that. I don't know enough about the topic. Now, what's wrong with that? I don't want him lecturing the audience. I want him drawing the audience out into discussion of what it's like to live today with kids or themselves with a smartphone and what they're doing about it. Are they afraid? Who's doing what? I want to facilitate an orchestrated discussion on the topic instead of bringing an expert in. And that's what I like about this group is none of us come forth talking about our degrees or playing know-it-all. We all have something to share. And in that collective, and that's where Greg often comes in about the power of a collaborative, is with good facilitation as a leader who isn't necessarily in the know, but orchestrates a discussion. And that may be what Trump is going to do as a populist, is saying, look, I don't care you call me stupid. That's what Klein got away with that. He didn't say he was the smartest stick in the bunch. He orchestrated discussion, and through that discussion, something ultimately emerged that galvanized, and people paid attention. I think we've got caught up in the knowledge economy looking for a source of trust, when what society is really looking for is engagement. Because they want this type of thing. When they throw a view out, they actually want a response back. They want a dialogue. And too often we throw at them another damn PhD. And I'm not being critical, Tom, of the years of effort that we spent in getting it, but it has value inside academia. I'm not sure how much value it has in society anymore. And it's not just that people don't trust scientists. Scientists don't do science to get public trust. They do science in order to discover. So for someone to say we don't trust them anymore, a good scientist would say, I don't particularly care. That's not my job. I threw a lot out there. Go ahead, Jeff Kramer.
Yeah, I think that the trouble is that a lot of science is seen as being tainted, because if you look at you know, most of the studies that are being done in medicine and stuff, they're being funded by the companies that are producing the medicines, and so the results are quite often apparently skewed in a direction in favor of the finding that the company wants. And whether that's intentional or not, it seems to happen way too often. And so it's no surprise that people aren't trusting the experts the way that they used to. And when you have the government outright lying to us, you know, whether it's from the CIA or some other departments, or if we're, you know, getting I don't know, like the whole COVID thing, where we weren't getting necessarily the best information in a timely manner, and agendas were being pushed that weren't necessarily scientifically backed. Yeah, it's completely understandable that people are frustrated and don't trust.
Look, I'm not I'm not passing judgment on that. I'm just pointing out the factors, as you've done, that are contributing to that erosion of trust. And it does beg the question of what can we do to restore trust, not necessarily there or maybe come up with a new form of certification or a new analyst that does peer review for us. Maybe there is some God that will show up on earth and say, I can sort through the knowledge and tell you what is true and what isn't. Certainly there is a lot of AI coming along that claims it will be better at helping to sort through and building algorithms to get at the truth. But yeah, there's been an erosion of our institutions, an erosion of trust, and the knowledge economy is in trouble. The attention economy is, instead of learning and knowing being what was of value, that meant we spent money on universities, we spent money on degrees, we spent money on education, we now have an attention economy, which says it isn't what you know, it's the number of eyeballs you get.
Yeah.
Look at Taylor Swift. Yeah, I'll look at her. There's attention. But how many billion did she raise? You talk about an attention economy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure someone's done an analysis of what part or what it was she was doing that was getting all these eyeballs. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are we going to do about it, if anything? Or are we just witnessing, watching, and waiting?
Yeah.
Yogi?
Well, Jeff listed some action points that I thought were thoughtful. So it comes down to how much energy we have or can devote to this topic as, here we go, lobbyists or paper writers, as Randall talked about, or promoters in some way, shape, or form.
Well, and in a way, we're doing that. I do this 50 times a year, 50 newsletters, engaging more people, looking for people who like the topic. It's out there. There's plenty that enjoy what we're up to. I've got somebody I'm paying a little bit of money to in Bangladesh, God knows, increasing the viewership, increasing the subscribership. So we're putting some resources on extension, but I don't like to say I don't care. That sounds negative. I really don't do it for numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll play the game and see if something happens so I can learn whether or not if you spend $1,000, you get any ROI out of it. But look at it. At 82 years old, I do what I do because I enjoy it. I've always enjoyed learning. I enjoy meeting other people. I think today the one life experience, I'm going to reveal something, the one life experience other than my honeymoon that I will always remember as probably I learned more through this one life experience than I did in my pursuit of the PhD was when I hitchhiked to New York. And when I hitchhiked back, and then I went back again with my first wife. I learned more on that trip about humanity, about the goodness of mankind to respond to a simple thing like a thumb and the nature of the conversations that followed. I wish every kid could get involved in something that was involved hospitality, where they would have exposure randomly to human beings and realize that most human beings have something really positive to give.
So did you hitchhike?
We're raising them in this world of fear. Yogi?
Did you hitchhike from Long Island or Alberta?
Both ways. I hitchhiked from Alberta to Long Island. I hitchhiked from Long Island to Boston, back to Alberta. And when I went down with my first wife, after that, because she loved the stories, and so my parents wouldn't pick up the plane ticket for me to fly her down. They didn't like her. And so we played the game and we hitchhiked down and I brought her home, whether they liked it or not, on the dime of the riders.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a book or more, or maybe even a screenplay in what you're describing.
Here's the screenplay. If I do it again at 83, what would my experience be like now?
Yeah.
They locked me up halfway. Would they put me in? would they put me on some medication? I mean, I would love to do it again and replicate exactly. I don't think the trip would be any different than it was 50 years ago. And yet, oh no, you're you'd be worried somebody'd pick you up and kidnap you or beat you up or rob. I think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
I think it would be hard to get on some of the highways that I got on with a little sign saying, I never had a sign. All I had was my thumb, a sports jacket, and a suitcase.
Why don't you try a test to Lethbridge and back from your home?
I could do that. Here's I think most of you have heard this little test, Yogi. Apparently you haven't. When I hitchhiked to New York, now this is about attention. This is attention 101, because all I have is a thumb, and I'm trying to get attention. And somebody's driving down the highway at 100 kilometers an hour, and all I have to get what I want is his eyeball and a ride. So to get to New York with my thumb, it was 5 days and 55 rides. Got it?
Yeah.
Not many rides.
5 rides. Now, scenario number 2 in this research, I brought someone along with me called my wife. She had an orange muumuu dress down to her ankle. She had a white hat on, and she had a little hat box. I had my same jacket, same tie, same suitcase. How many rides and how many days when I had her with me?
I would guess fewer.
How could you possibly say fewer? I got 2 people now, not just one. 2 people got to get in the car. However, you're right. It was fewer. How can that be? It's marketing 101. What am I selling with my thumb? I'm selling trust. What was I portraying when I was there alone versus what I was doing when I had my wife there and her orange muumuu, etc.?
Yeah.
It's probably trust. However, and this is really interesting. And I only thought about this year, and I've told this story dozens and dozens of times, publicly and otherwise, in order to have this discussion on attention and whatever. Why is it that the rides that we got with her were also longer? I got a lot of short rides. Why did we get longer rides with her?
I think you attracted a different profile of stopper to pick you up.
That's the tautology. We understand that. We know that. Why? Who were they? What is it that they saw? Okay, this is what I think happened. They saw 2 people. They assumed it was a longer trip than simply me alone. And so the people that passed us by were people going for longer trips, or passed me by, were going for longer trips. They didn't want to take a chance of sitting with a guy for a long trip. So they picked me up for short trips, or else they didn't like me and dumped me off early. But I think when they saw a couple, they figured it was a longer journey, and the people going longer distances were picking us up. But that is a very interesting element in this piece of research.
Yeah.
Is the fact that I got fewer rides, longer distances with 2 people than with 1. Ask a young person the question without life experience, and they get it wrong. They always see two is more than 1, therefore it was more complex. You're going to get, it's going to take you longer.
I'm reminded of the Norman Rockwell Saturday Night cover where there's one guy out with his thumb and 4 buddies are hiding behind a bush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this isn't part of the webinar, but there are many stories that emanated out of that journey, which is part of why, as an existentialist, and why I say I got such an education, is there were many experiences, and only one potentially negative. In Deer Lakes, Minnesota, it was a Sunday morning, church bells ringing, doves flying in the air. You can imagine this little idyllic town, Deer Lakes, Minnesota. I had the longest wait I had ever had in my life. It was 45 minutes waiting for a ride. And finally, this farmer comes along the road with his little quarter ton. He picks me up and I hop in the car. And the first thing I say to him in his cab, is, what is going on? This is the longest wait I've ever had. And you know what he says back to me? You got any smart ideas, fellow? I got a pistol underneath the front seat. What was going on? Well, apparently a Navy hitchhiker had shot a farmer the week before. Okay, that was that experience. My other one was in Mattawa, Ontario. I had not slept coming from Boston. I had $5 in my pocket. hitchhiking back to Edmonton, and I was not gonna sleep. I slept in Montreal in a used car lot, which was very usual. I'd look for an open door and I'd sleep in the car. Hit the road again, and I'm in I decide, I think it was at Espanola, Ontario, I can hug the Great Lakes or I can do the shortcut through Northern Ontario. I decided to take the shortcut through Northern Ontario, but it meant hitchhiking at night, which I'd never done before. But if I made it, it's the hypotenuse, it's a shorter ride. I'm in Mattawa, or no, I'm in Chalk River, and it's late, and I finally get a ride, except it's a drunken Frenchman, and he is all over the highway. There's no suspension in his truck, in his car. He drops me off in Mattawa, and in Mattawa there's a trestle bridge, and I stand at the end of the bridge knowing that when the truckers are coming through, they're going to spot me at the end of the bridge with their headlights, and I'll get a ride from one of them. And sure enough, a trucker picks me up, but it's like 3 a.m. I am beat. I get up in the cab. My first words to him is, "Thank God, I have not slept since Montreal. I got to get a rest." He said, "And you're not sleeping now either, Sonny." I said, "I got to get this load into North Bay by 7 this morning. You got to help keep me awake. I'm falling asleep." So we're slamming the door. We got the windshield wipers going. I'm opening the windows. We're doing everything we can to keep him from going off the road. We do. We get into Mattawa right about 7 o'clock. I step out of the cab. I look at the truck as it departs. What's on the side of the truck? Danger, dynamite. He was delivering to North Bay. The next ride, 5 of the most beautiful blonde women I've ever seen in my life pick me up, and I'm tired. My imagination wasn't dead, though. It was a pretty boring trip, but it was a nice follow-up to the journey to Mattawa. Anyway, I'll tell you, you want to have some fun? Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should go on the news. It would be an attention getter.
You'd have to live stream it, Perry.
We'll hitchhike, yeah, live stream it with that. And each one of us will take a part of the journey, and we'll see how many days we can do it each individually, and then we'll take our wives. Oh, this is a good webinar. I don't think we're going to record most of this, but this is fun. Jeff, did you ever hitchhike?
I never hitchhiked, no. I mean, maybe once or twice over many, many years, but no, not like you.
You'd love it. I mean, you got the gift of gab. I got picked up by a very, very wealthy guy on one of these stretch limos in Chicago. And he wanted to know where I was going. He just thought this was interesting. And he picked me up. He didn't know who I was. And he obviously saw a hitchhiker that looked curious. And I told him what I was up to. He thought that was cool. Good luck. I got picked up by a gay Harvard professor in Buffalo, New York. Wanted me to stay overnight at the motel as we were driving through the New York Turnpike. Interesting people. A trucker in Montana telling me what it was like to drive across the Montana in the middle of the winter when the truck could hardly make it up over the hills because the wind was blowing so heavy across the prairies. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else got their your yellow thumbs up? Tell me we didn't hear from you. What are you shaking your head for?
One of the reasons, Dave, when I pick up you and your wife, of course, is also clear evidence of a need for a ride. You're hiking with your wife.
That's right. Well, you
Another
knew
matter, of course.
Well, you knew Marion, so you might have.
Yes, of course.
I've
Yeah.
known this story. Yeah. Well, she was a bit of an adventurer. She thought it was cool. Till I think we were in Niagara Falls, and the handle broke off the suitcase. That was a real problem. Making it the rest of the way without a handle on the suitcase, and her suitcase was heavy. All right. Where's Randall? Is he still around, or did he? Oh, there he is. You're down at the bottom of my screen. I don't have anything more to share. Maybe I had too much wine today. Damn it.
Should I stop recording?
I don't know. What do you think, guys? Want to have an after party together? I got to get upstairs. It's my 24. Okay, I got a test for you, and then we'll quit. This is a formula. If anybody knows this formula, I want them to tell me what it is I'm measuring. And if I've done this with you before, then shut up. The formula is 2 times 7, 2 times 4, 4 times 7, all of that times 150. So it was 2 times 7 plus 4 times 7 plus 2 times 4. All of that times 150 divided by 2,000. What am I measuring? Okay, here's
A 2,000 is a ton, an
That's right.
imperial ton.
Something about
That's good.
time.
that. The 7 is probably the number of days in a week.
Mm.
Mm.
The other number is how many times I left my wife.
Oh dear.
The equation is 250 tons a year. Work out the numbers. 68 times 150 divided by 2,000 gives you a certain number of tons. I think it was 45,000 pounds, something like that. Divide that, and it came up to 250, roughly 250 tons. I got to buy some Voltran.
You know,
All
Perry,
right, guys.
and we were talking about speed a while ago, the emails that we've had back and forth this week.
Yeah.
The thing that Jeff responded to or brought up about putting things in scale with grains of
Yeah.
sugar. I think this is one reason why we need to have a different translation for some of these large numbers like that. Put it in perspective.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, then I went looking for what ships weigh 250 tons, and a Navy. There are ships in the Navy aircraft landing craft that weigh 250 tons. So I found ships that weigh that much. Not that I lift them at once, but over the course of a year. By the way, next week, Rennie Rupert and I are on Monday going to tape the webinar. He's giving me a discussion on knowledge management, and Dawn Ringrose will facilitate that or participate next Thursday. So the newsletter's been written. The supplement to that I'm putting together, I think, Jeff, you've had some input on it as well, the other Jeff. But that'll be what the newsletter touches on this week. It's a good follow-up to the attention economy. And there are aspects of what he has to talk about that I'm not sure I necessarily agree with. He emphasizes, as is the case in Europe, the human element of knowledge management, whereas in North America, we emphasize the technical element of knowledge management. And presumably what is emerging is a hybrid of bringing these forces together. But it's very interesting to look at the cultures of Europe and the culture of North America, and why North America is more technically technology engineering driven, and Europe is much more humanistic in terms of its pursuit of knowledge and how to manage it. It should be an interesting discussion. So I invite you to join us again.
Good. All right, Perry.